They lit up on screen and off, inhaling stardom and exhaling death. While cigarettes were once glamorized as sophisticated accessories for Hollywood elites, the tragic reality is that lung cancer claimed our brightest stars. These 35 legends crafted unforgettable performances while their lungs quietly betrayed them. Are you ready to discover which icons smoked 5 packs a day? Humphrey Bogart. Bogart didn't just play tough guys on screen. He faced his final battle with a stoicism that rivaled any of his noir characters. The original bad boy of Hollywood dominated films like Casablanca and The Maltese Falcon, with a cigarette perpetually dangling from his lips. What audiences didn't see was the devastating toll. By 1956, esophageal cancer had spread to his lungs, leaving the once formidable actor weighing a mere 80 pounds. His voice, that iconic gravel-toned instrument, silenced forever. At just 57, the man who taught generations how to light up with style became a cautionary tale. His wife, Lauren Bacall, placed a gold whistle in his cremation urn, inscribed with, "If you want anything, just whistle," a haunting reminder of their first film together. Critics called his death the end of an era, but in truth, it was just the beginning of Hollywood's deadly pattern. John Wayne, the Duke who couldn't outrun his own shadow. John Wayne embodied rugged American masculinity across 170 films, standing tall at 6'4", with a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. Between takes, he'd light up incessantly, puffing through 5 packs daily with the same determination he showed on horseback. The 1964 diagnosis hit hard. Lung cancer that required removing an entire lung and 4 ribs, leaving Wayne literally hollowed out. Yet he charged back to filming, hiding his painful struggle to breathe, coughing through scenes while his barrel-chested frame slowly shrank. When cancer returned, he switched to cigars, claiming he wasn't really inhaling. Ironically, the man who survived countless on-screen shootouts finally fell to stomach cancer in 1979 at age 72, a complication linked to his earlier lung disease. In a rare vulnerable moment, Wayne called cancer the toughest fight of my life and urged fans to get regular checkups. The cowboy who never backed down from a fight couldn't defeat the enemy he'd invited into his lungs. Clark Gable, Hollywood's king, reigned supreme in life, but couldn't cheat death. Gable's chiseled jawline and effortless command captivated audiences in Gone with the Wind, where he delivered cinema's most quoted line with rakish charm. Behind that perfect facade lurked a chain-smoking habit, 3 packs daily chased by strong coffee, that studio executives claimed kept him sharp. In 1960, while filming The Misfits opposite a troubled Marilyn Monroe, the 59-year-old insisted on performing his own stunts despite visible exhaustion. Colleagues whispered he looked like he was dying. Just 12 days after filming wrapped, Gable suffered a massive heart attack. He never regained consciousness. Medical experts later revealed his lungs showed early cancer formation. Decades of cigarettes had silently sabotaged his heart and lungs. His son, born 10 weeks after his death, never met the father whose iconic status couldn't protect him from mortality. The ultimate irony: the man who once told Scarlett O'Hara he didn't give a damn left behind a world that always would. Bette Davis, the smoking siren whose cigarettes became weapons of mass seduction. Bette Davis didn't just light cigarettes. She wielded them like daggers, her sharp dialogue punctuated by dramatic exhales. Her eyes narrowed through smoke, delivering lines in All About Eve and Jezebel that cut deeper than any blade. Behind the scenes, Davis smoked up to 100 cigarettes daily, an addiction studios encouraged as it enhanced her husky voice and intense gaze. As roles for aging actresses grew scarce, Davis fought back, reinventing herself in horror and television, winning new audiences even as her lungs blackened. In 1983, breast cancer struck. She survived surgery but suffered multiple strokes that partially paralyzed her face and body, yet still she smoked. When asked about regrets, she famously quipped, "If I had to live my life again, I'd make the same mistakes, only sooner." Cancer returned with a vengeance, claiming her in 1989 at age 81. At her funeral, someone placed a cigarette in her casket, a fitting tribute to the woman who once made smoking feel revolutionary but paid the ultimate price. Gary Cooper, America's straight shooter, who couldn't dodge his deadliest enemy. Gary Cooper's natural, understated style earned him 2 Academy Awards and an eternal place in cinema history. Standing tall at 6'3" with piercing blue eyes, Cooper embodied authentic American strength in classics like High Noon and Sergeant York. Off-camera, the Montana-raised actor maintained a private battle with cigarettes, a habit that silently undermined his rugged health. By 1960, Cooper was diagnosed with aggressive lung cancer that rapidly spread to his bones. Ever the professional, he maintained his dignity and privacy, even as pain consumed him. When Jimmy Stewart accepted Cooper's honorary Oscar in 1961, he tearfully revealed that his friend was dying, news that shocked Hollywood. Cooper passed away just days later at 60, his stoic image intact until the end. Critics noted the cruel irony that the man who survived countless on-screen showdowns was ultimately gunned down by tobacco. His daughter Maria later revealed he'd tried desperately to quit smoking in his final years, but addiction proved his most formidable opponent. Nat King Cole, the velvet voice extinguished by the very smoke that shaped it. Nat King Cole wasn't just a singer, he was a sound. His rich, silken voice caressed listeners through classics like Unforgettable and Mona Lisa, becoming part of America's sonic fabric. What fans didn't know was Cole's dangerous belief that cigarettes enhanced his signature sound. He insisted the smoke gave his voice husky warmth, the captivating tone that didn't just sing, but wrapped itself around listeners' memories. Lighting up constantly, Cole puffed through 3 packs daily, sometimes more, considering it not a habit, but a vocal ritual. By late 1964, the 45-year-old began losing weight mysteriously, his chest tightening ominously. Doctors discovered aggressive lung cancer had already spread. Even then, Cole attempted to perform, filming his final TV special from a stool, struggling for breath between verses. On February 15, 1965, the voice that warmed a generation fell silent. At his funeral, fellow legends Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. wept openly. The cruel irony hung heavy. The voice that made millions feel warmer had been burned away by the very smoke that supposedly shaped it. Dean Martin, the lounge legend who laughed through the smoke until the bitter end. Dean Martin epitomized effortless cool, velvet voice, easy charm, and that signature wink suggesting he was always in on the joke. With the Rat Pack, he ruled Las Vegas, crooning hit after hit with a cigarette dancing between his fingers. Producers thought it added flair. Audiences never imagined it would eventually steal his breath. Behind his relaxed exterior, Martin lived a quieter life than his public persona suggested, enjoying golf, old friends, and routine. Everything changed after his son Dean Paul died in a 1987 plane crash. Devastated, Martin withdrew from public life, his once radiant performances losing their sparkle. Still, the cigarettes remained his constant companions, even as his health deteriorated. Diagnosed with lung cancer in the 1990s, Martin refused surgery, choosing to spend his final days in his Beverly Hills home, surrounded by memories rather than machines. On Christmas Day, 1995, at age 78, he passed quietly. The man who made joy look effortless ultimately couldn't charm his way out of cancer. His eternal wink and swagger couldn't outrun the habit he'd made look so harmless. Yul Brynner, the bald king who turned his death into his most powerful performance. With his distinctive shaved head and commanding presence, Yul Brynner dominated The King and I and The Ten Commandments, creating characters that towered over Hollywood's landscape. Born in Russia and raised across continents, Brynner's exotic appeal made him instantly recognizable, as did his ever-present cigarette. When lung cancer struck in 1983, Brynner didn't retreat quietly. Instead, he channeled his remaining strength into a final, unforgettable role: himself. Shortly before his death, he filmed a haunting anti-smoking public service announcement, staring directly into the camera to deliver his most chilling lines not as a character, but as a dying man. "Now that I'm gone, I tell you, don't smoke." The commercial aired after his death on October 10, 1985, shocking viewers with its raw authenticity. At 65, Brynner transformed his personal tragedy into perhaps his most impactful work, a warning that continues to resonate decades later. The king had fallen, but his message lives on, asking audiences one crucial question: will we heed his final warning? Betty Grable, America's pinup with a price she couldn't afford to pay. In 1943, Betty Grable's photograph in a white bathing suit adorned the lockers of 5 million soldiers, her million-dollar legs and playful glance becoming a symbol of wartime morale. As the highest-paid woman in Hollywood, Grable dazzled in Technicolor musicals, her smile softening the edges of a brutal war. Behind the sequins and high kicks lurked studio pressure to remain perfect, stay slim, and always sparkle. Their solution? Cigarettes. Executives encouraged Grable to smoke to control both appetite and nerves. What began as a slimming trick became a lifelong dependency. She smoked through rehearsals, performances, even pregnancies. By the 1950s, her star dimmed as she aged out of the roles that made her famous. The phone rang less frequently, forcing her to turn to Vegas and summer stock to keep the spotlight alive. In the early 1970s came the devastating diagnosis: lung cancer, progressing with frightening speed. Friends remarked she remained cheerful until the end, never one to show weakness. In 1973, at just 56, the woman who gave America its wartime smile faded away. No cameras, no curtain call. The cruel twist? The cigarettes that kept her marketable ultimately made her mortal. Edward R. Murrow, the voice of truth who ignored the most vital warning. Edward R. Murrow wasn't an actor or singer, but in broadcasting's golden age, he was unquestionably a star. His deep, steady voice brought World War II's horrors into American living rooms, reporting from London rooftops during the Blitz. Later, his fearless takedown of Senator Joseph McCarthy's Red Scare tactics became journalism's defining moment of courage. Through it all, cigarettes remained his constant companion, visible during every broadcast, interview, and late-night rewrite. Sponsors loved it. Viewers expected it. Murrow puffed through 3 packs daily, ignoring emerging medical warnings about smoking's deadly consequences. By the early 1960s, Murrow had stepped back from the spotlight, his voice, once commanding and resolute, noticeably weakening. Diagnosed with lung cancer in 1964, he faced an enemy too advanced for treatment. His final days were spent at his family home in Pawling, New York, far from the broadcast studios where he'd once shaped a nation's understanding. On April 27, 1965, at just 57, Murrow died. A bitter irony that the man who fought for truth couldn't recognize the lie he'd told himself about cigarettes. The voice that once calmed a nation during its darkest hours was silenced not by censorship, but by smoke, an unseen enemy he'd invited with every broadcast. Robert Taylor, the matinee idol whose perfect image went up in smoke. With his striking good looks and undeniable screen presence, Robert Taylor dominated MGM's roster for decades. Born Spangler Arlington Brugh, Taylor's chiseled features and masculine charisma carried him through romances, westerns, and historical epics like Camille and Quo Vadis. Behind that flawless facade lurked a destructive habit, chain smoking that eventually ravaged both his appearance and health. As he entered his 50s, Taylor's heavy smoking began taking its toll. The once impossibly handsome face showed premature aging, while persistent coughing interrupted film takes. Despite transitioning successfully to television with The Detectives and Death Valley Days, Taylor's health deteriorated rapidly. In 1968, doctors delivered the grim news: lung cancer, advanced and aggressive. Despite surgery, the disease progressed relentlessly. Taylor died in June 1969 at just 57, a shocking early exit for a man once considered Hollywood's physical ideal. Industry insiders whispered that Taylor's final days were spent in regret, mourning not just his life, but his image. The irony that the actor who personified physical perfection was ultimately destroyed by his own choices. Taylor's legacy stands as cinema's most visible reminder that even beauty isn't immune to addiction's ugly consequences. Vincent Price, the master of horror who couldn't escape his most terrifying reality. In the glow of flickering candles, Vincent Price made audiences' skin crawl with just a whisper. His theatrical, intelligent performances in House of Wax and The Pit and the Pendulum defined horror for generations. Surprisingly, the man behind the sinister characters was cultured, gentle, and sophisticated, a gourmet cook and art collector whose off-screen personality contradicted his macabre roles. One thing remained consistent: Price's heavy smoking, a habit spanning decades that silently undermined his most powerful instrument, his voice. By the late 1980s, that signature deep purr that once sent chills began to crack and weaken. Diagnosed with lung cancer, Price faced his final act with the same grace that characterized his career. He continued working despite his declining health, making public appearances even as his tall frame grew thinner and his breath shorter. The spotlight that once showcased his talents couldn't hide the cancer's ravages. In 1993, at age 82, Vincent Price passed away, a master of manufactured fear ultimately claimed by a very real killer. The cruel irony wasn't lost on friends. The man who played death for a living eventually learned its quiet truth, that the scariest endings aren't accompanied by dramatic music or special effects, but by the slow, invisible unraveling of the body from within. Jack Carson, the versatile everyman who couldn't outplay his deadliest role. Jack Carson wasn't Hollywood's biggest star, but he was arguably its most reliable character actor. His 6'2" frame and remarkable versatility allowed him to seamlessly switch between comedy and drama, stealing scenes in over 90 films, including Mildred Pierce and Arsenic and Old Lace. Directors trusted Carson to elevate any material, while audiences connected with his authentic, relatable presence. Off-camera, Carson's easygoing personality mirrored his on-screen personas, but so did his era's ubiquitous smoking habit. By the early 1960s, persistent respiratory problems signaled trouble. Diagnosed with lung cancer, Carson initially kept his condition private, continuing to work despite increasingly difficult breathing. Friends noticed his once booming voice growing softer, his energetic performances requiring more recovery time. When the diagnosis became public, Hollywood rallied around the beloved actor, but medical science offered limited options. On January 2, 1963, Carson died at just 52, his career in full swing. Industry peers were stunned. The man who seamlessly navigated every role couldn't escape cancer's script. Critics later noted the tragic irony that an actor known for playing ordinary men ultimately suffered an ordinary man's fate, cut down by the same habit claiming countless Americans, famous or not. Carson's legacy lives on, not just in his performances, but as a reminder that cancer doesn't discriminate, even among those who brought joy to millions. Dick Powell, the singing sleuth who couldn't detect his own killer. Dick Powell pulled off Hollywood's most impressive transformation, morphing from a fresh-faced crooner in 1930s musicals like 42nd Street to a hard-boiled detective in film noir classics like Murder, My Sweet. Audiences and critics were floored by his range, watching the boyish tenor reinvent himself as a tough private eye with shadows in his eyes. Behind his career, evolution lurked constant cigarettes, in his dressing room, on set, during production meetings. Like many stars of his era, Powell believed smoking gave him edge and authority. By the early 1960s, Powell had climbed Hollywood's ladder to become head of Four-Star Television, one of the industry's most powerful independent studios. Then came the persistent cough he couldn't shake. Doctors delivered devastating news: cancer of the lymph nodes, spreading rapidly. In a bizarre twist, his final directorial project, The Conqueror, was filmed downwind from nuclear test sites in Utah. Years later, an unusually high cancer rate among the cast and crew raised questions about radiation exposure compounding his smoking-related illness. On January 2, 1963, at 58, Powell died. The man who masterfully shaped diverse roles couldn't rewrite his final act. His voice, which once sang across America's airwaves, was silenced by the very habit that had framed his on-screen persona. His legacy spans genres, but his death highlights how even the most versatile stars couldn't escape tobacco's deadly role. Joan Crawford, the Ice Queen who couldn't script her exit. Joan Crawford built her life around control. Every photograph, every appearance, every gesture meticulously crafted for maximum impact. Born into poverty, she clawed her way from dancing in nightclubs to winning an Oscar for Mildred Pierce. With sharp cheekbones, scarlet lips, and a gaze that could cut glass, Crawford wasn't just a star, but a brand. Behind that polished veneer raged a relentless battle to maintain relevance in an industry that worshipped youth and discarded women who dared to age. Crawford's greatest weapon was discipline: ice baths to tighten skin, grueling workouts, perfectly curated wardrobe, and always, always cigarettes. They were props, companions, and crutches. She chain-smoked, believing they kept her nerves steady and figure lean. As years passed, the smoke left its mark, her voice growing raspy, her legendary energy dimming. By the mid-1970s, Crawford withdrew from public life after one final appearance, where she felt she no longer looked like the Joan Crawford people expected. Friends reported she could barely cross a room without pausing for breath. Then came the diagnosis: pancreatic cancer, aggressive and merciless. Crawford, ever the perfectionist, faced it on her terms, refusing a public farewell, no interviews, no pity. On May 10, 1977, at 73, she died alone in her New York apartment. For a star who scripted every career detail, this ending was cruelly unplanned. No control, no retakes, no glamour. Just a woman who'd mastered reinvention, finally meeting the one thing she couldn't retouch. Ray Milland, the Oscar winner with shadowed lungs. Ray Milland's slick hair, piercing stare, and clipped British charm made him a studio darling capable of playing heroes, villains, or broken men with equal conviction. His Oscar-winning performance in The Lost Weekend showcased his remarkable range, portraying an alcoholic writer's spiral with such authenticity that it forever changed addiction depictions on screen. Behind his polished image, Milland wrestled with the same pressure facing many Hollywood stars: the constant strain to stay relevant, endure long hours, and manage the stress of celebrity. Cigarettes became his constant companion. One between takes, one before bed, one when nerves frayed. By his 60s, these habits had etched their legacy into his lungs. In his final years, as newer stars eclipsed him, Milland continued in television and smaller roles, his once commanding voice gradually weakening. Doctors eventually confirmed the shadow in his lungs, cancer spreading relentlessly. The disease brought a cruel poetry. The man who had once embodied suffering on screen now lived it privately. His breath shortened, his energy faded, but he never complained, maintaining his dignified bearing in interviews and appearances. Ray Milland died in 1986 at 81, carrying to the end a certain Hollywood stoicism, buttoned up, reserved, unwilling to seek pity. The tragedy wasn't in scandal, but in silence: how the very tools of his trade, the smoke, the pressure, the perfectionism, had been quietly destroying him from within all along. Buster Keaton, the silent genius who gasped 66, breathing had become laborious, and doctors diagnosed lung cancer. Friends reported Keaton didn't fully comprehend the severity, or perhaps didn't want to. He continued appearing in short films and interviews until his final days, spent confused and gasping, unaware the disease had already spread beyond treatment. On February 1, 1966, at 70, Keaton took his final bow. No headlines, no fanfare. The man who built his legacy on impossible escapes couldn't evade this invisible enemy. He'd made the world laugh without saying a word, and in the end, it was silence that claimed him. Walt Disney, the imagination giant felled by an enemy he couldn't animate away. Walt Disney didn't just create cartoons, he built entire worlds, transforming entertainment and defining childhood for generations. From Mickey Mouse's debut in Steamboat Willie to the groundbreaking Snow White, Disney pushed animation's boundaries while building a corporate empire that included television, films, and theme parks. Behind this relentless creativity and business acumen lurked a heavy smoking habit. Disney was rarely photographed without a cigarette, often smoking up to 3 packs daily. In late 1966, doctors discovered a walnut-sized spot on Disney's lung, cancer that required immediate surgery. Even then, Disney continued working from his hospital bed, sketching ideas for Disney World in Florida between treatments. His condition deteriorated rapidly, and on December 15, 1966, just 10 days after his 65th birthday, the visionary who'd brought joy to millions died. The Disney Company, fearing public reaction, initially reported only that he'd died after a lengthy illness, downplaying the cancer connection. This secrecy spawned bizarre rumors that Disney had been cryogenically frozen beneath Disneyland, myths that persisted for decades. The tragic reality was simpler. The man who'd created immortal characters couldn't escape mortality himself. Perhaps most heartbreaking, Disney never saw his Florida project completed. The Magic Kingdom opened 5 years after his death, a kingdom whose creator had been dethroned by the very smoke that had fueled his legendary workaholic habits. Desi Arnaz, the innovator who smiled through suffering. Desi Arnaz changed television forever while hiding his personal pain behind a megawatt smile. To the world, he was Ricky Ricardo, sharp tuxedos, conga drums, and that unmistakable grin opposite wife Lucille Ball on I Love Lucy. Behind the cameras, Arnaz was revolutionizing the industry, pioneering 3-camera filming, live studio audiences, and syndication as we know it today. He didn't just perform, he built the stage itself. Success came at a staggering cost. Running Desilu Studios while navigating a marriage strained by rumors and resentment pushed Arnaz to his limits. He smoked constantly, not for the aesthetic, but for the momentary escape each cigarette provided, a brief respite from crushing pressure. By the time I Love Lucy ended, his marriage had quietly imploded, and Arnaz retreated from the spotlight, though he couldn't outrun cigarette's shadow. In his final years, Desi lived quietly in Del Mar, California, far from Hollywood's glare, but not from the habits that haunted him. Diagnosed with lung cancer in the late 1980s, he endured a slow, painful decline. The voice that once made America laugh with Babalu faded to a whisper. The pain wasn't just physical. Building a television empire only to leave it behind in silence weighed heavily. Yet even then, Arnaz maintained his humor. When daughter Lucy asked if he needed anything near the end, he quipped, "Yeah, a new pair of lungs." Desi Arnaz died on December 2, 1986, at 69, better known as Lucy's ex-husband than the television revolutionary he truly was. His smile lit up screens while his lungs dimmed in private. Steve McQueen, the king of cool, who couldn't outrace his deadliest enemy. Steve McQueen dominated Hollywood with a magnetic anti-hero appeal, performing his own stunts and living as fearlessly off-screen as his characters did in classics like Bullitt and The Great Escape. His rugged masculinity and blue-collar authenticity made him the highest-paid actor of the 1970s and a cultural icon whose influence extended beyond cinema to fashion and motorcycles. McQueen's rebellious persona was fueled by a 2-pack-a-day cigarette habit, a constant companion until a persistent cough in 1978 wouldn't subside. The devastating diagnosis came in December 1979, pleural mesothelioma, an aggressive cancer affecting the lung lining. While smoking didn't cause this rare cancer directly, doctors noted it significantly worsened his condition. McQueen traced his asbestos exposure to movie set insulation and the protective suits he wore while racing cars professionally. Always a fighter, he rejected conventional treatments when his cancer spread, instead seeking controversial therapies in Mexico. His final months were spent with third wife Barbara Minty, pursuing alternative treatments while hiding from paparazzi. On November 7, 1980, just hours after surgery to remove tumors, McQueen suffered a fatal heart attack. At just 50 years old, Hollywood's greatest action hero couldn't complete his most important escape. Ironically, the man who performed death-defying stunts ultimately couldn't outrun the combined effects of asbestos and cigarettes, proving even legends aren't invincible against invisible killers. Paul Newman, the blue-eyed humanitarian with a smoke-clouded legacy. Paul Newman wasn't just Hollywood royalty, he was its conscience, using his extraordinary fame to build a philanthropic empire that's donated over $570 million to charity. With piercing blue eyes and effortless charisma, Newman captivated audiences in classics like Cool Hand Luke and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, while maintaining an uncommon humility. Despite his clean-cut image, Newman battled a decades-long smoking habit, a vice he attempted to hide from fans, especially after launching his food company with its wholesome, healthy image. Friends reported Newman finally quit smoking in the 1970s, a victory that came too late. By 2008, whispers spread that the 83-year-old actor had been diagnosed with lung cancer. Newman, fiercely private about his health, retreated to his Connecticut home, refusing interviews and declining public appearances. His last major public event was the 2007 Hole in the Wall charity, where attendees noticed his thinning frame and subdued energy. On September 26, 2008, Newman died at home, surrounded by family, including his wife of 50 years, Joanne Woodward. The official statement mentioned only that he died after a long battle with cancer, maintaining the privacy he'd always valued. Industry insiders later confirmed it was lung cancer, a delayed consequence of his smoking years. Perhaps most poignantly, the man who donated all profits from Newman's own to charity left one final legacy, a cautionary tale about tobacco's long shadow, proving that even decades after quitting, cigarettes claim their final payment. Lucille Ball, America's favorite redhead, extinguished too soon. Lucille Ball revolutionized television with I Love Lucy, becoming the first woman to run a major production studio and creating the template for sitcoms that persists today. Her fearless physical comedy and impeccable timing made her a household name, while her business acumen transformed her into an industry powerhouse. Behind that iconic red hair and wide-eyed expressions lurked a chain-smoking habit, one Ball maintained throughout her career despite awareness of health risks. On set, she'd often light up between takes, with cigarettes becoming as much a part of her routine as her comedic falls and double takes. By the 1980s, Ball had begun experiencing cardiac issues, undergoing heart surgery in 1988. Though the procedure initially seemed successful, complications emerged. On April 26, 1989, at age 77, Ball suffered an aortic rupture, a condition doctors linked to her decades of heavy smoking, which had weakened her blood vessels. The woman who pioneered television comedy died just days after her final public appearance at the Academy Awards. Industry insiders noted the cruel irony that Ball, whose perfectionism extended to every aspect of production, couldn't control tobacco's destructive effects on her body. Her death sent shockwaves through Hollywood, the loss of not just a comedic genius, but a business pioneer whose career spanned radio, film, and television. Lucy had made America laugh for decades, but her final act revealed tobacco's unfunny reality. Even beloved icons aren't immune to addiction's consequences. Robert Mitchum, the laconic rebel whose cool facade hid a deadly habit. Robert Mitchum embodied Hollywood's perfect anti-hero, sleepy-eyed, deep-voiced, and projecting an air of dangerous indifference that made him irresistible in noir classics like Out of the Past and chilling in The Night of the Hunter. His seemingly effortless acting style and bad boy reputation made him a unique star who seemed to care little for Hollywood politics. That same nonchalance extended to his health. Mitchum was a notorious chain smoker who openly acknowledged his habit, despite mounting evidence of its dangers. When asked about potential health risks, he reportedly shrugged, "Cancer? So what? We've all got to go sometime." This cavalier attitude masked the reality that would eventually catch up with him. By the 1990s, after appearing in over 100 films across 5 decades, Mitchum's health began deteriorating noticeably. His once powerful voice weakened, and his energy flagged during his final television appearances. In 1997, doctors confirmed lung cancer, advanced and aggressive. Despite his tough exterior, friends reported Mitchum was shaken by the diagnosis, finally confronting the consequences of his lifelong habit. On July 1, 1997, at 79, Mitchum died at his Santa Barbara home, the quintessential cool guy, ultimately undone by the very habit that had been part of his image. Critics noted the sad irony that the actor who specialized in characters who could survive any danger couldn't escape the toxins he willingly inhaled for decades. His legacy as film's perfect tough guy remains intact, though his end reminds us that even rebels aren't immune to addiction's fine. Spencer Tracy, the naturalistic genius who couldn't act his way out of addiction. Spencer Tracy brought an unprecedented realism to Hollywood with his understated performances, winning back-to-back Oscars and earning a record 9 nominations during his illustrious career. His methods seemed deceptively simple. Know your lines and don't bump into the furniture. Yet this apparent effortlessness masked incredible skill that influenced generations of actors from Brando to De Niro. Off-screen, Tracy battled multiple demons: alcoholism, depression, and a lifelong smoking habit that accompanied him through classics like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and Judgment at Nuremberg. Between takes, Tracy lit cigarettes with the same practiced ease he brought to his performances, the smoke becoming as much a part of his presence as his piercing gaze. By the mid-1960s, Tracy's health had deteriorated significantly. Heart problems compounded by emphysema made breathing increasingly difficult. During filming of his final movie, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, director Stanley Kramer had to schedule Tracy's scenes carefully, allowing for frequent rest periods. The actor appeared gaunt, his once powerful presence diminished by illness. Just 17 days after completing filming, on June 10, 1967, Tracy died of a heart attack at age 67, a death doctors linked directly to his decades of smoking and drinking. The film was released posthumously to critical acclaim, with Tracy earning a final Oscar nomination. The tragic irony wasn't lost on Hollywood. The most natural actor of his generation ultimately couldn't escape the unnatural consequences of tobacco addiction, his final performance a testament to both his extraordinary talent and his body's quiet surrender. Dick Van Dyke, the elastic comedian whose smoke rings nearly closed too early. Dick Van Dyke's rubber-limbed physical comedy and infectious warmth made him a beloved household name through The Dick Van Dyke Show and classics like Mary Poppins. His seemingly boundless energy and wholesome image belied a serious 3-pack-a-day cigarette habit that began during his Air Force service in World War II. By the late 1960s, Van Dyke was not just battling nicotine addiction, but also alcoholism, creating a dangerous combination that threatened both his career and life. The wake-up call came during filming of the 1968 musical Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Van Dyke found himself winded and struggling through dance numbers that should have been effortless for the trained performer. Medical examinations revealed early-stage emphysema and warning signs of potential lung cancer. In a moment of clarity, Van Dyke made the decision that would ultimately save his life. He quit both smoking and drinking completely. The withdrawal was brutal, with Van Dyke later describing it as the hardest thing I've ever done. Unlike many of his Hollywood contemporaries, Van Dyke's story has a happier ending. His lungs gradually recovered, and at 98 years old in 2025, he remains active, still dancing and singing with remarkable vigor. His longevity serves as living proof of the body's resilience when given the chance to heal. Van Dyke frequently speaks about his narrow escape, telling interviewers, "I was lucky. I quit just in time. Many of my friends weren't so fortunate." His experience stands as a rare success story among a generation of performers who paid the ultimate price for their smoking habits. George Harrison, the quiet Beatle silenced by a loud killer. George Harrison brought spiritual depth to the Beatles with his sitar-infused compositions and introspective lyrics in classics like "While My Guitar Gently Weeps" and "Here Comes the Sun." After the band's breakup, he continued as a successful solo artist while pursuing humanitarian causes, most notably organizing 1971's Concert for Bangladesh, the first major celebrity benefit show. Behind his gentle demeanor and philosophical outlook lurked a heavy smoking habit that began in his teens and continued through much of his adult life. Harrison was surprisingly open about tobacco's dangers, once remarking, "I'm a living example of someone who has abused his body." In 1997, the first warning came. Doctors discovered throat cancer, which Harrison attributed directly to smoking. After successful treatment, he believed he'd beaten the disease, telling friends he'd been given a second chance. The reprieve proved brief. By 2001, cancer had returned, this time in his lungs and brain. Despite aggressive treatments in Switzerland and America, the disease advanced relentlessly. On November 29, 2001, at just 58, Harrison died in a friend's Los Angeles home. In accordance with his Hindu faith, his ashes were scattered in the Ganges River. Music critics noted the painful irony that the most spiritually attuned Beatle ultimately couldn't transcend his physical addiction. Harrison's death at such a relatively young age shocked fans worldwide, serving as a stark reminder that even those who seek higher consciousness remain vulnerable to terrestrial habits. The quiet Beatle had shared Roddy McDowall, the gentle collector who couldn't escape the fog. Roddy McDowall wasn't the loudest man in Hollywood, but his presence lingered. From child star in How Green Was My Valley to his unforgettable turn as Cornelius in Planet of the Apes, McDowall's eyes always held a knowing depth that set him apart from showbiz's typical noise. Unlike many stars, he avoided headlines and scandals, instead collecting film memorabilia, books, and meaningful friendships. His Hollywood home became a museum of cinema history, where legends from every era felt safe to be themselves. Yet even in his refined, intellectual world, cigarettes remained a constant companion. Long, elegant, often held between careful fingers while he recited Shakespeare or discussed film preservation. For McDowall, smoking wasn't a crutch, but an accessory until it became something far deadlier. In the 1990s, after decades of beloved character work, McDowall began to fade noticeably. It started with breathlessness during his frequent public speaking engagements. Then came weight loss and the hollowing of the voice that had narrated countless documentaries and audiobooks. The diagnosis confirmed what many feared: lung cancer, aggressive and unforgiving. Even in decline, McDowall maintained his characteristic composure, neither raging nor retreating. He quietly called close friends to say goodbye and made meticulous arrangements for his vast film archive. On October 3, 1998, at 70, he passed away at home, surrounded by the cinema treasures he'd spent a lifetime preserving. Hollywood lost not just an actor, but its most dedicated historian, a gentle soul slowly overtaken by the very smoke that had once draped him in mystery. In a town built on shouting, Roddy McDowall whispered, and somehow everyone heard him. Joan Blondell, the pre-code bombshell extinguished by her own flame. Joan Blondell burst onto screens during Hollywood's most risque era, her blonde curls and knowing smile lighting up Depression-era audiences in over 100 films. From Gold Diggers of 1933 to A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, Blondell embodied a working-class sensuality that felt authentic because it was. She'd worked as a circus performer and Broadway chorus girl before Warner Brothers discovered her. Unlike many of her contemporaries, who faded after the production code tightened moral standards, Blondell successfully transitioned through decades, appearing in films from the 1930s through the 1970s, culminating in an Oscar nomination for The Cincinnati Kid. Behind her remarkable adaptability lurked a dangerous constant: cigarettes, which Blondell embraced with the same enthusiasm she brought to her performances. By the 1970s, decades of smoking had taken a visible toll. Her once vibrant energy diminished, breathing became difficult, and persistent respiratory infections plagued her. Diagnosed with leukemia in 1979, doctors discovered her condition was complicated by severe lung damage from years of tobacco use, creating a deadly combination. On Christmas Day, 1979, at 73, Blondell died in her Santa Monica home. The actress, who had survived Hollywood's constant reinventions, ultimately couldn't overcome her most personal habit. Critics noted the sad irony that a performer who had weathered the industry's most dramatic changes, from silence to talkies, from pre-code to censorship, from ingenue to character actress, was finally defeated not by Hollywood's notorious fickleness, but by the cigarettes that had been her constant companions through it all. Dana Andrews, the noir hero who couldn't escape his darkest shadow. Dana Andrews embodied film noir's quintessential protagonist, the flawed detective or troubled veteran navigating a morally ambiguous world in classics like Laura and The Best Years of Our Lives. His controlled performances and resonant voice made him perfect for portraying men wrestling with inner demons while maintaining outer composure. Off-screen, Andrews battled a real demon, alcoholism, which he eventually conquered through dedicated sobriety work with the National Council on Alcoholism. Less publicized was his equally destructive cigarette habit, which persisted long after he achieved sobriety from drinking. By the 1960s, Andrews recognized tobacco's dangers and became an early anti-smoking advocate, speaking candidly in interviews about his struggle to quit. Despite multiple attempts, the addiction proved more tenacious than alcohol, continuing to damage his lungs, even as he warned others about its risks. In his later years, Andrews' health deteriorated significantly. His once commanding voice weakened, and breathing difficulties limited his activities. Diagnosed with lung cancer in his 70s, Andrews faced his illness with the same straightforward dignity that characterized his performances. On December 17, 1992, at 83, he died of heart failure, his cardiac issues directly linked to his smoking-damaged lungs. Film historians note the poignant parallel between Andrews's screen personas and personal life. Both featured men who overcame certain challenges, war trauma in films, alcoholism in life, only to be undone by forces beyond their control. His journey from addict to advocate came too late to save him, but potentially saved countless others who heeded his warnings about tobacco's insidious grip. Ronald Reagan, the great communicator silenced by a habit he rarely discussed. Before becoming America's 40th president, Ronald Reagan enjoyed a successful Hollywood career spanning over 50 films, from Newt Rockin' All-American to King's Row. His all-American good looks and clear, authoritative voice made him a reliable leading man, though never quite a superstar. Like many actors of his generation, Reagan was a regular smoker, a habit he began as a young radio announcer in Iowa, believing it enhanced his vocal delivery. Unlike contemporaries who flaunted their cigarettes on screen, Reagan kept his smoking relatively private, rarely photographed with cigarettes during his political ascent. By the time he entered politics, Reagan had quit smoking, a decision made in the 1950s after recognizing its health implications. The damage, however, had already been done. In 1985, during his second presidential term, Reagan underwent surgery to remove polyps from his colon. 2 years later, more serious news arrived. Surgeons discovered a small tumor in his right lung, requiring a portion of the lung to be removed. While White House officials downplayed the connection to Reagan's former smoking habit, doctors privately confirmed the likely link. Though Reagan recovered and completed his presidency, his post-presidential health gradually declined. On June 5, 2004, at 93, Reagan died after a long battle with Alzheimer's disease, but medical experts note his respiratory issues from smoking-related damage complicated his final years. The irony wasn't lost on health advocates. The president, who masterfully used communication to reshape American politics, had voluntarily exposed himself to a substance that might have shortened his communicative abilities in his later years. His early decision to quit likely extended his life significantly, making him a silent testament to both smoking's dangers and the benefits of cessation. Frank Sinatra, the chairman of the board who couldn't dictate terms to his lungs. Frank Sinatra wasn't just a singer, he was a cultural revolution, transforming popular music with his phrasing and interpretation while building an acting career that earned him an Oscar for From Here to Eternity. His legendary voice, capable of both tender vulnerability and swaggering confidence, defined American music for generations. Throughout his extraordinary career, Sinatra's cigarette remained as iconic as his fedora, a constant companion during recording sessions, film shoots, and his raucous nights with the Rat Pack. Sinatra reportedly smoked up to 4 packs daily of his preferred Camel brand, dismissing early health warnings with his characteristic defiance. By the 1980s, the consequences became undeniable. His breathing grew labored, especially during performances, forcing him to adjust arrangements to accommodate shorter phrases. Though never publicly acknowledged, insiders confirmed Sinatra's doctors had diagnosed significant emphysema and early-stage lung cancer. His final concerts revealed a voice diminished from its former glory, still emotionally resonant but physically constrained by damaged lungs. On May 14, 1998, at 82, Sinatra died of a heart attack, officially unrelated to lung issues, though medical experts note the strain smoking-related conditions place on the cardiovascular system. The final irony wasn't lost on music historians. The man with the most distinctive voice in American popular music had willingly exposed that irreplaceable instrument to tobacco's corrosive effects for decades. The chairman of the board controlled everything in his empire except the quiet deterioration occurring inside his own lungs, a reminder that even legends must eventually pay the piper for their lifelong habits. Critics noted the cruel irony that Bogart, who made cigarettes look essential to sophistication, was ultimately consumed by them. The man who taught America how to smoke with style became an early, unwitting cautionary tale about tobacco's merciless endgame, proving even icons aren't bulletproof against cancer's silent invasion. What shocks you most? Was it John Wayne smoking 5 packs daily even after losing a lung? Or Yul Brynner's chilling posthumous anti-smoking commercial? Perhaps it's how many died in their 50s and 60s, robbed of decades they might have enjoyed. Comment below with which star's story hit you hardest, and, if you're a smoker, did any of these Hollywood tragedies make you consider quitting? After all, if the invincible Humphrey Bogart couldn't beat lung cancer at 57, what chance do ordinary mortals have against tobacco's deadly script?